Good afternoon or morning, depending upon where you are. It's morning where I am here in Denver. Um, uh, so glad you all are with us. This is quite a diverse audience. I mean, it's a large audience for those of you who are wondering. We have in-house counsel, outside counsel, providers, C-suite, consultants, compliance professionals, people in the comp world, you name it. It's quite a diverse audience. So we'll do our best in this presentation to speak to everybody. The name of our webinar is Unintended Consequences: How Work RVU Heavy Compensation Models Could Put Hospitals and Patients at Risk. I'm really excited to be here with my colleagues. We'll get to introductions here in just a minute. Go to the next slide, please. There we go. So this is what we're going to try to cover and really think about this in terms of connecting the incentives for better or for worse that come with compensation models with behaviors and the things that we need to do to protect our organizations, our patients, ourselves from the consequences or results that are often unintended. So we'll work through this. We're going to talk both about compensation sort of compliance as well as the clinical compliance at the other side of this that's closer to the patient. And then in between, talk about the physician's perspective in the middle of all of this. So, next one, please. So, objectives. What we really want to do here is, and Justin, I like the way you use the word tether. Is tether leadership, action, compliance, knowing what we're up against with compliance models and all of the regulatory and legal stuff, all that world that threatens us, how we tether all of our activity to proper behavior, safe behavior, and behavior that ultimately keeps our patients safe. So as we work through this, that's what we're going to try to cover, is to give you some insight, but then also some tools to help you or your clients stay on the safest ground possible. So I'm John Moses. I am founder, now senior vice president of Northgage. You don't see that name here at all, but we became part of Coker about a year ago. We did this for very strategic reasons, and it has a lot to do with being able to offer an array of services that you'll see some of today, all under one roof. Again, in what we believe optimal support of our clients. And so my background's hospital administration. I've spent the last 20 years of my career, though, making it my purpose to help the providers stay on the safest ground possible, but more importantly, the patients that they serve. And so Northgage serves clients in every state. Now, Northgage, a Coker company, and we work in matters from physician peer review to compliance to clinical due diligence, and then lots of strategy consulting in the clinical world around all of that. Uh, Dan?
Hey, everybody. Dan DeBenke. I'm Senior Vice President, Chief Physician Executive here at Coker. I call myself a recovering emergency physician and recovering health system CEO. So I've been on the provider side for about 30 years and now on consulting for about 7 or 8 years. I lead Coker's performance transformation practice with my partner, Paul Weintraub. My role here, as John has talked about, is to perhaps put a human face and humanize the provider component to this conversation that we're talking about with respect to compensation, compliance, and risk. One thing, just from an audience standpoint, we do want this to be interactive, so please feel free to use the Q&A function on your screens or the chat function, and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the presentation and certainly intersperse that throughout the conversation as the questions come in. Justin?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, John. Justin Chambly, president of Coker. I have spent really the last 20 years working with provider compensation, both from a valuation and strategy standpoint, also doing a lot of hospital physician alignment work. And it's really fun to partner with Dan and John on this because historically we would have come to the table with a specific point of view based on our limited expertise dealing with largely the valuation and the sort of strategy matters, dealing with provider compensation and being able to add the physician viewpoint and also the sort of utilization dynamic to it that John and his team bring to the table is just it's fun to partner with my colleagues here. So let's dive in, Jess, if you'll flip to the next slide and talk just a little bit to lay the foundation surrounding productivity related dynamics. And really, I do want to set the foundation for what John is going to dive into a bit later surrounding clinical compliance. And as I think about compliance with respect to compensation arrangements, there's the dollar element tied to it, meaning rate per RVU or percentage of collections, whatever it may be, but there's a dollar element tied to the calculation of compensation, but there's also the productivity element. And oftentimes, a lot of the focus is on the dollar value and less focus on the productivity element. But really, compliance involves focusing on both of those. And so I'm going to focus a little bit more on the dollar side and let John touch on the utilization side. And when we're talking about provider compensation, we can't do so without talking about wRVUs. I think everybody in this phone or this conference likely know what wRVUs are, so I'm not going to go into details there. The key thing that I want to highlight is they've been around for a long time. wRVUs are not new. The resource-based relative value scale was put in place in 1992, and it has been ramping up in terms of its use relative to provider compensation since then. One thing I always like to highlight when we talk about wRVUs is the impact of the RUC. If you're not familiar with the RUC, it sets the values. So it is the Relative Value Update Committee. They set the wRVU values. I think it's fascinating to read up on the RUC. I would recommend you do if you're not familiar with it. But the key thing that I like to highlight relative to the RUC is they wield much power right now in terms of influencing physician behavior as relates to how they value wRVUs, and in turn, it impacts provider compensation. And oftentimes there's a question surrounding why consider wRVUs. And as I look at the different elements that can be used to measure productivity, which it's not uncommon to have productivity measurements in a fee-for-service environment, meaning we're aligning the incentive structure with the reimbursement structure. I think wRVUs have ultimately been deemed to be the best of a host of imperfect measures. I think you'll find many people that say wRVUs are not perfect, but it is perhaps the best of imperfect measures. And what we've found or seen over the years is, as we go to the next slide, physician employment has materially ramped up. This is just showing over the last 5 years where it jumped from roughly 62% to 78%. And I think it's likely climbed further based on when these stats were from. But as we've seen employment increase, the use of wRVUs has continued to increase, meaning they are on center stage. I would say 9 out of 10 physician arrangements, and that's probably a conservative estimate, use wRVUs as opposed to other measures. And so it is a predominant way to look at and think about provider compensation. An interesting phenomenon that we have seen over the last number of years is the rate per RVU that physicians are getting paid continues to increase. The chart here shows that continued increase over the last 5 or so years, yet what we experience is reimbursement is decreasing. And that is creating what I would call financial tension for many healthcare organizations because they're trying to keep up with what is deemed to be, quote, market relative to provider compensation, yet there's not money to pay that. And that is in turn increasing the investment per physician, loss per physician, investment per physician, which we highlight on the next slide. And you can see it has moved from $158,000 per physician on average in 2019 and has almost doubled to $300,000 in 2024. And that investment, it's not solely influenced by increasing provider compensation, but it is heavily influenced by increasing provider compensation because it is one of, if not the largest expense item that a physician enterprise experience. And what I think is an interesting thing to think about as we reflect on that investment per physician dynamic is as that investment per physician increases, will that start to put pressure on healthcare organizations to reduce what they are paying per RVU? And in my mind, a concern that we have to be thoughtful of, and I think John will touch on this later, is as that pressure ramps up, will we see physicians thinking about productivity differently in order to maintain similar levels of compensation? Meaning, as a surgeon, if I've gotten comfortable making $700,000 of compensation, just to use an illustration, and the rate per RVU that I'm getting paid at is decreasing because of market pressures, am I going to think about trying to influence my productivity to try to maintain that $700,000 if otherwise, if I didn't change that input, my compensation could decrease? And I think there is risk always associated with that as relates to any kind of volume-based compensation arrangement. If we go to the next slide, I want to start to just talk a little bit about the guardrails that can be put into place as relates to provider compensation, because strong compliant programs, I think we can all agree, are important. We need to control for all inputs. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the focus oftentimes is on the dollar value and the total amount of compensation being paid, yet we also have to be focused on the utilization related dynamics. Healthcare, highly regulated, as we know. If we go back to that last slide for just a few moments, highly regulated. I think it's appropriately regulated for the reasons noted, meaning trying to protect medical judgment and make sure it's not influenced by other behaviors. We want to have fair and transparent financial relationships. We want to uphold patient trust and do right by patients in terms of the care that we're providing, and make sure that they know that what they're getting care-wise is necessary and appropriate first and foremost. And the Stark Law and AKS, which focus heavily on, as we see on the next slide, on fair market value and commercial reasonableness, help to protect around some of these risks. With fair market value, in the most simplistic terms, focusing on the dollars and cents of a transaction, and commercial reasonableness focusing on more so, does the transaction or the arrangement make sense in the SENSE framework? So fair market value, dollars and cents; commercial reasonableness, does it make commercial sense? Is there a actual business purpose for it? And so these are largely protecting the economic dynamics of a transaction and making sure that the overall economics are apropos. And it's a big deal. As many of us know, we see the news articles about these, but just to highlight some of the large cases that have come across the OIG's desk over the last number of years, and we see this on the next slide. But Covenant Community Health Network, cardiac imaging. I include cardiac imaging here because it's not a large health system. Sometimes we think the risk is only on the large health systems, but it's not. But we see a lot of large settlements tied to cases ultimately involving improper financial relationships with physicians. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with strong compliance programs is protect against these situations. And this is just a sampling of some that are prevalent in the news. And if we touch on some of the things that we can do to protect against these risks, and this is by no means a all-inclusive list, but they're just some of the items that I think make sense to look at as we think about building compensation structures that can protect against some of the fair market value risk. I focus a lot on compensation caps and ceilings. Like, how are we policing the overall economics being paid to physicians when they are pushing the upper echelons? And then also just generally strong provider compensation governance. And I want to dig a little bit deeper into each of these. And we could spend literally the entire hour just talking about protective measures in terms of model structure and design. And so I acknowledge that we're being focused with some of the solutions here, yet I think these are key ways that we can make sure that we are hedging against risk that otherwise may not go noticed. So if we go to the next slide, let's dive just a little bit deeper into the compensation cap dynamic. Many people may be familiar with compensation caps. If I think about arrangements that I look at for physicians, typically they either have no cap, they have a hard cap, or they have a soft cap. No cap is just that there is no upper limit on what a healthcare organization is going to pay that physician. They may have some other governance processes or review processes in place to screen, but contractually, there is no limit. Hard caps is just that. There's going to be a set amount of compensation. It could be $1 per RVU, whatever it may be, that compensation is not going to exceed. And then a soft cap is more so a trigger point for additional review. As I think about the if we go back to the prior slide, if I think about hard caps and soft caps, I prefer soft caps. And the reason is, first off, hard caps, what I've seen is either they are set too high to where they're really not an effective screening mechanism, meaning 120th or 120% of the 90th, 150% of the 90th, like it to me, if we're not looking at things until compensation gets that high, are we effectively screening out or screening for risk? The other dynamic is if a hard cap is set too low, it's going to limit a physician's ability to meet patient demand in that community if that patient demand is there. So in essence, a physician could hit that hard cap by, October, November of a year and really not have as much incentive to maximize their schedules and see as many patients as may be needed for the rest of the year. And so a hard cap, if it's set too low, set too high, it can prove to be challenging. And that's where I lean on soft caps, because in essence, it provides a checkpoint for additional review. And when we get into that additional review, it's not just looking at the financial elements, which I think are important. It's looking at supply demand dynamics to understand, does the market need justify the levels of production and compensation that we're seeing be paid? How is the investment per physician trending? But also, like, are we digging into the utilization dynamics? First off, perhaps starting with coding audits, but then digging deeper in terms of, like, is the work that the physician says they're doing actually possible in terms of what can be done in a day? And then, and this is where I'll leave it to the expert John to dig in deeper, are there underlying utilization risks that need to be like vetted to make sure that care is truly proper? So that's compensation caps in a nutshell. As I said, we could go way deeper. I think the other thing that I see as imperative within organizations who are employing a lot of providers, paying on productivity-based structures, is having a strong governance process in place. And I'm going to overly simplify this by focusing on three key elements. First off is structure, meaning strong compensation committee oversight, meaning that that body is well formed, they understand their roles and responsibilities, and they are actually acting upon those. Strong written compensation policies, not just how a physician is going to get paid, but then how we're going to adjudicate compensation caps and other things. So it's both thinking about compensation on the front end and the back end. If we move outside of structure, it's monitoring, it's regular audits, both in terms of coding audits, peer review. It's having good data. I've seen many organizations struggle to actually vet potential risk because of the lack of data. And so having strong dashboards, getting good ongoing information surrounding productivity trends, I think is key. And then it is instituting, some kind of annual fair market value and commercial reasonableness review to make sure that risk is being identified and effectively addressed. And then it goes without saying, an organization needs to create a culture of compliance, high ethics, strong governance, which I think can be done through physician communication in terms of making sure it's clear as to what we expect, how we're going to treat certain situations where things perhaps are going out of bounds, strong appeal and review process, and making sure that the physician enterprise is fully aligned with the strategic goals of the organization so that everybody can be moving in lockstep together. So, from a governance standpoint, structure, monitoring, and culture are key. And that may be way more than you wanted to hear from me. And so I want to turn it over to my colleague Dan and let him talk a little bit from a physician perspective, how physicians may think about the risk related dynamics. So Dan, it's all you.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I think the thing to remember here, and it's important thing to remember is at the intersection of what Justin's talking about, which is comp plan design and governance, and what John's going to talk about, which is risk and compliance and mitigation, is the provider that's providing the care. And so I would propose to you to keep in mind that most providers, when they come to work every day, are not thinking about how am I going to maximize my work RVUs today. They're thinking about the schedule that's in front of them, the staff that they have to deploy that day, and also thinking about just how they're going to care for the patient. And physicians will generally respond rationally to the environment and the incentives that they're placed in. If the compensation model rewards productivity, then they'll work hard to meet those expectations, not to exploit the system. The intent isn't really to do more to get more pay. It's more to meet the perceived expectations of the organization and the patient needs within the construct of the structure that's been placed around them, which is the compensation plan. And so that's when we discuss overutilization and compliance risk, we need to be careful not to frame it as intent driven. The risk is systemic. It's related to the function, the design of the plan and the alignment, and not around physician ethics.
Yeah. I always say, Dan, that when I'm working on compensation strategy related projects, that physicians, well, anybody does what they're incentivized to do, and I think physicians are no different. Meaning, if we put productivity based incentive structures in place, everybody's going to respond slightly differently than that. But for some, like they're going to want to maximize the incentive structures in front of them. And I think that to your point, like it is a systemic dynamic where if we're putting incentive structures in place, we need to make sure that we understand the inherent risks associated with it.
Yeah, and I think and what gets to the comment that I'm trying to get across with this slide, which is that we think of a compensation plan, but there are different personas of providers that work within the constraints and the confines of that compensation plan. And we have to realize that what may be viewed as fair and motivating for one provider may be viewed as restrictive and or inhibiting to another provider. And so we need to think of that as we're thinking about how providers function and perform within a compensation plan. High producers, oftentimes their mindset is, listen, I'm being rewarded for the work that I do. I work hard, I get rewarded for that. Intermediate or moderate producers oftentimes have made some individual and professional trade-offs, either be it through other components to their FTE, so their clinical FTE may be lower and they're doing other things very common in academics, or they've made personal work-life balance decisions about how they're going to perform in that compensation plan. And then there are low producers who, for a variety of different reasons, be they operational within the function of their clinic or limited support coverage, may feel undervalued. And I think the important thing is that in a compensation plan, if you've got strong oversight, you've got reasonable caps, as Justin has talked about, you've got clear governance, the system can actually reward productivity while staying compliant. But without those guardrails, even in a well-intentioned provider, can inadvertently push the edges and drive behavior that raises red flags. Not because they're acting in bad faith, but because the structure is subtly encouraging certain patterns. So the goal isn't to eliminate incentives, it's to design them thoughtfully and to make sure that the organization's definition of success aligns with the physician's sense of professional integrity. You can go to the next slide. And, at the end of the day, compensation models are about human behavior, and John's going to talk a lot about that. Physicians are as diverse in motivation as any workforce, and some thrive on volume and pace, and others may prioritize components of either their professional or personal lives, and others may feel constrained, as we've talked about staffing shortages, EMR inefficiencies, lack of support, patient population challenges. And so this can put the organization at risk. And John's going to talk a lot about that. And Justin has talked about much of the mitigation strategy with respect to how the comp plan is designed. When we evaluate productivity data, we need to understand the why, though, behind the high performers, the low performers, the moderate performers. And a truly balanced compensation model will recognize the spectrum of provider personas, motivate excellence, protect against abuse, and ensure both that the organization and its physicians can operate with integrity. At the end of the day, it's about protecting our patients, it's about protecting our providers, and protecting our organizations. That's not to say that there aren't going to be bad actors in all of this, and John will give, I think, numerous examples of what that looks like. But I want us to remember the role of the physician and the physician persona in that intersection of the comp plan and organizational risk. John?
And drop the mic. Really well said, both of you. And I think this does tee me up pretty well. I was thinking as you two were talking about, number one, I've been a human being for 63 years, so I speak from experience. And I say that a little bit facetiously, that some of us pay attention to, ourselves and what's motivating us to do things, and others don't pay attention to that. I do. And my undergraduate degree is in studying human motivation. And so this has been a part of my life and my profession. I think we need to pay attention to these motivations because only when we do that and we understand that can we build in the proper programs, incentives, safeguards, et cetera. Justin, as you spoke, I was imagining a circle. Here we have a circle on the screen, but there's a different circle, and if it's a circle of compliance, and you covered one half of it, which deals with the compensation side. What I'm going to try to do is cover the other side of compensation for a fully well-rounded compliance program, and there are other elements as well, but to make sure that we're addressing the side of compliance that's closer to the patient. So first, to lay a very quick foundation, nothing I have to say here is intended to implicate all or even most providers. And let's talk about physicians. We're talking about physician comp when we talk about providers. Most providers, including physicians, provide thoughtful, caring, appropriate service to their patients. They do it right, but some don't. So sometimes unintentionally and sometimes intentionally, they make mistakes, as Dan alluded to before. And understanding the forces of human motivation, what's driving behaviors or may drive behaviors, is what's behind the most effective compliance program. And so for those that don't fully appreciate the risks associated with fraud and abuse, perhaps some information can lead to fear or anxiety, which is a powerful motivator. So I hope to create a little sense of anxiety here for those that don't fully appreciate what must happen to stay on the safest ground. So let's talk a little bit about what's at stake. Just next. So when we look at fraud and abuse, which is where I'm focusing mainly on false claims, I'm talking primarily about providers. That's in large part where I and my colleagues on this clinical side of Coker, formerly Northgage, live. And we're called on by our hospital and other provider clients, health systems, their counsel, et cetera, in every state of every shape and size to assess the damage sometimes from breaches when it's too late, Sometimes we're called upon to help to minimize the damage, and sometimes it's to put changes in place to keep bad things from happening again. But my preference is to design and build strong compliance programs that prevent bad things from happening in the first place. So let's look at some of the data that helps us appreciate how serious the problem is. First of all, if you've been to conferences lately, and if there are attorneys there and think about AHLA, this stuff is talked about all the time. Don't worry so much about the 21 blip. That's a lot of COVID related stuff. Really, the trend is upward. The DOJ enforcements and recoveries is on the rise, and much of that is related to these false claims. So we'll talk more about what those mean in just a second. Next slide. And then the OIG is also involved. Similar numbers, big numbers. It is on the rise. As I'll say here, I've covered a little bit. Let's remember too that these are government payers, government concerns. The commercial payers are waking up as well. So we're talking about improper billing, false claims, and medically unnecessary services. So if you weren't at least a little bit anxious a few minutes ago, I hope that you have some heightened sense of anxiety now. We can't begin to relax or I should say, we can come to relax when we appreciate that there's a lot that we can do about this. So aside from the compensation compliance tools Justin outlined, you must put in place active compliance activities that address potential false claims. So let's see what that might look like. Uh, in my practice, has seen so much, thousands of cases that we've reviewed for literally thousands of organizations. So keep in mind, and Daniel alluded to this, it doesn't have to be intentional. Sometimes it is, often it's not. But false claims are devastating. We've reviewed thousands of cases. Like I said, we've seen it all. Here are some of the more common areas where we see breaches. And so these are the areas that tend to get the focus of the feds. Surgery. So back surgeries. Hey, I'm in here, I can operate on a few extra levels. Or maybe that's the way I was trained, but it runs counter. So it's unintentional. It's counter to the regulations or, say, a local or national coverage determination. We see a lot in joint replacements, gallbladder removals. A big one on the rise now is how surgeons are closing wounds. There is more money to be made by closing wounds in a more complicated fashion, by taking adjacent tissue and so forth. These are more complex wound closures. They make more money. They're not always necessary. They often are, but they're not always necessary. This is going to grow, I can tell you. Heart and vascular is the largest area for us, and I think gets most of the attention. We're talking about unnecessary cardiac stents. I put in one. I see a little something over there. I put in 2 or 3 more. I'll read the angiogram to show more blockage than is really there. We see this as an outsider when we look at these cases objectively, but what it results in is unnecessary intervention that sometimes, and this is the worst part of what we see, is when somebody receives an unnecessary intervention that takes their life. So we're talking about very serious stuff here. Below the knee revascularizations is a big area. Some of the screening procedures, increasing concern about the scopes, EGDs, colonoscopies, wound care. You can't turn on the news anymore in healthcare without seeing what's going on in wound care. The skin substitutes. You probably saw the recent CMS news that there's a huge limit being put on, a very tight limit being put on what's going to be paid for those skin substitutes. So that's going to change things dramatically. But those have left a wake of destruction in their path. We probably have 10 projects going on right now trying to help our clients recover from or minimize the damage, having been found to, or at least alleged to have been using the skin substitutes in inappropriate ways. So you name it. If it is a elective or urgent procedure, if it involves the discretion of a physician as to whether or not to take action, to intervene, to diagnose, it is just assume it's going to be the subject of concern. So these motivations, we have financial incentives. We've talked plenty about those. Defensive medicine, we hear that one a lot. I have to do these things because if I don't, I might get sued. True. but not always the best way to defend yourself. Patient demand. The patient comes to me and says, I want this shoulder replaced. I want this, and I have to keep the patient happy. So I decided to do it. Well, that's not a very effective way. You have to stand up and be a physician and properly advise your patients. And this last category, as far as motivations, often fly under the radar. Competition for block times. I can get the best blocks, the best times to operate if I have more volumes than my colleagues. My privileges. There are minimums with privileges. I have to do so many PCIs, so many of a certain type of surgery to maintain my privilege. I'm running a little behind. I'm getting to the end of the year. Man, I better step this up. I'm motivated to do more than I might otherwise do. I'm not saying physicians are acting on this, but these motivations sure are there. And we have seen them result in inappropriate, unnecessary care, unfortunately.
Hey,
Uh,
John, as you
yeah.
think about these four different elements, I mean, do you see one or two being more prevalent than the others in terms of where you see issues arising?
I have done a lot of consulting, and a lot of it's been with my colleague, Dr. Rob Morkin, who's been my partner for many years in this realm. And he always, when people leave the room after an interview, he always kicks back in his chair and he says, "Follow the money." And it's crazy how much that really does apply. So I would say the financial incentives, no doubt, and you covered a lot of this well earlier. The financial incentives are both wonderful and they can be dangerous if they're not handled in the right way, both by proper design and then proper reconnaissance, which is what I'm about to get into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, John, have you seen, so just be curious if you've seen any trends recently with, not even recently, but just trends in general with respect to the level of tenure of the provider. And as I think about providers, especially procedural based providers who have just come out of training, perhaps fellowships, have been in larger academic organizations with access to a lot of resources. Have you seen any trends with respect to some of the unnecessary procedures or exposure related to where they are in their practice? Lifespan?
We should do a whole nother webinar on this. I think that's really a great question, Dan, and I can imagine what's resonating or what's bouncing around in your mind. I will tell you that one of the things that's wrong with physician training is that too many people come out of fellowships from higher complex, higher acuity, let's say, kinds of specialties. Let's look at neuro spine surgery. Somebody comes out of fellowship and goes to a smaller hospital to start a brand new program without mentorship, without training, and all they have is what they brought from school. They don't have the mentorship, they don't have the people around them, and they get into trouble. We've been called into projects where where it's too late. There are already 30 lawsuits, and when we unpack that, we wonder how in the world did this happen. Um, should have been a good, strong mentor there to help this person along. And so what we've now done is ruined a career. We've harmed people. We've devastated a hospital and the community who leaned on this hospital. Then further along, and I think this is potential as healthcare evolves so rapidly. And Justin, you touched on this. As the margin gets smaller, the amount per work RVU gets smaller. There's this motivation to do more. I don't think that really is unique to any age group. But I will say that younger physicians come out and they're disillusioned, right? They expect a lot more and they come out and they're shocked by the business of medicine. And so hopefully the younger folks are surrounded by the more experienced seasoned physicians and people like us who can help leaders guide people on the right path in their career so they don't go to the darker side.
And one thing that always strikes me, which I think is a helpful point, and then I'll let you get back to it, John, is I mean, a lot of times we talk about like overutilization, work RVUs, creating perverse incentives. I mean, I and maybe you can comment on this, but as we get more and more into value-based care, I have to imagine like there's similar risk with respect to what I'll call underutilization, meaning withholding care that perhaps is not medically appropriate because if we're in a capitated type arrangement, like that's how we maximize incentives in those realms. And so to me, whether we're leaning towards fee for service, which is where we've lived for the longest time, or leaning into the value-based care realm, like utilization dynamics, whether it's overutilization, underutilization, like are prevalent, and like in any structure I think is going to lead to, potentially perverse incentives. But as I said, I'll let you get back to.
No, it's true, but that's all about what compliance is for. If we didn't have any risk of having our best intents result in bad things happening, we wouldn't need laws, we wouldn't need regulators, we wouldn't need government, we wouldn't need compliance programs. And so, yeah, there are these untoward consequences, unexpected results that put people in harm's way, and that's what we're trying to talk through is to and to try to protect people from. By the way, this is by design. This slide has been up here for a long time, and the whole idea is to create anxiety for those that are leaders in healthcare. But look, there is growing evidence that class action suits for unnecessary care are increasingly claiming corporate negligence, not only for creating the incentives. So these great programs, well intended, et cetera. Plaintiffs' attorneys are saying, you created the incentive for this physician to do more and unnecessary procedures. But then worse, and this is what we really want to stop, is you did nothing to protect patients from their results. And so if you go to the next slide, this very first one at the top of this slide is you'll hear more and more about this, but Providence, and you by the way, just Google the common terms. You'll see so much about this, but the Providence one is really interesting. This is a guy, or actually a couple people, but mainly one who was doing unnecessary back surgeries. Providence settled. There's now a class action brewing. It's been brewing for some time, and as part of that, there's a claim of corporate negligence. And so I think we're just going to see more and more of this. But again, my job here is to create some healthy anxiety so that hopefully that'll lead to some change. Okay, so let's just talk about some things that we can do to build a culture of the right kind of care. All right. So next slide. First, building a compliance program. It's you can't just check a box and say we have a department of compliance. It has to be done correctly. And Justin did a great job of covering it on the compensation side. Let's talk about it, the corollary to that on the clinical side, the results maybe of the compensation and what we need to watch for. To have an effective compliance program, you have to sell it. The board has to buy into it. The board has to be educated. It is their responsibility. They're the representatives of the community and the people being served by the organization. Sell it. Okay. Sell it as a solution to problems or risks the organization faces. Build it right with the right people. It's critical. Not just somebody who has compliance behind their name, but people who get it, understand it, and not just the common compliance, not to diminish, Justin, what you were saying, but the fair market value, commercial reasonableness kinds of compliance, but also the compliance as it relates to the clinical impact that might result for the people served, the patient.
And John, real quick, I mean, to that point, I do think oftentimes there's a lot of focus on the dollars and cents and not necessarily pulling back or peeling back the onion, the layers of the onion. I'm terrible with analogies. I think that makes sense, but peeling back the layers of the onion and understanding like what is driving those high levels of compensation in terms of getting more into the weeds on the actual utilization patterns. And I do feel like if we are only focused on the dollars and cents, we may be missing some underlying risk. And so I think your point is very, very valid.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who know me have heard a lot of these stories, and we live these every day, seeing the impacts of these things, and it's not always money. So it really isn't. There are a lot of motivations here in play that result in bad things happening. Some hear the story about my brother. For those of you who know what a Whipple surgery is, my brother received a Whipple surgery for pancreatic cancer. Here's the punchline that he didn't have. He didn't have pancreatic cancer, but he had this unbelievable surgery that has forever changed his life. He survived it because he was actually a healthy guy that received a Whipple surgery. But we see this stuff all too often, and that situation and many others should never happen. And there are ways to keep them from happening. And as I'm trying to get across in this slide, as governing bodies, as leadership, appreciate the risks, and they appreciate the things that can and should be done about it, and they appreciate the risks for themselves and their organizations of not putting these systems, these programs in place, then hopefully that'll motivate more and more hospitals and other providers to act. May come as a surprise, but it is really shocking how many times we are in very prominent organizations and we see completely inadequate compliance programs. And we're there because something really bad happened that shouldn't have. That compliance, that quality monitoring, integrated efforts really could have protected the organization and its patients from. So, next slide, please. Uh, if you want to change behavior or maximize compliant practice to maximize the right kind of care, probably consistent with the mission, put the right incentives in place, first of all. It's not easy. Justin had pointed out, it's not easy. There are the best of maybe the worst. There's no easy solution here. We're talking about human beings. It's just not easy. But once you have what you think are the best incentives, then watch to make sure they're having the desired effect. That's what the monitoring piece is all about. Don't just hope and monitor, or worse, hope and not even monitor. Healthcare is it's a crazy game. It really is. I mean, I was thinking too earlier about how when we play a family game over the holidays, everybody's got their cards and you want to win, right? And you see kind of out of the corner of your eye the cards of your brother or your parent, and you're motivated maybe to want to look over there and see the cards that are kind of flashing in front of your face. The question is, do you look or don't you? And it's a silly analogy, Justin, because you're so bad at analogies. I thought I'd jump right in. But the question is, are you going to do the wrong thing there or the right thing and not look? That's only a card game. We're really talking about human lives and careers and reputations. So I don't mean to minimize it, but it is a crazy game. And there's so much, there are so many strategies that lead to what feels like victory today. Hey, I'm making great money today. I'm getting all I want, but it can have devastating loss in the future. And that's what we want to protect against. So, what we want to do is recognize this, and that recognition is the foundation for great compliance. So, I'm just going to touch on a few of these, and then I want to get to the end of this so we can leave time for questions. These are solutions, and I'll tell you, these are not inexpensive, but they can be. I mean, think about performance management, another passion of mine. You can just reallocate effort in our organization to things that may be more important than the things that are being done today. And if you can align people through performance management and the right incentives to the organization, board, leadership, executive leadership, physicians, staff, around doing the right things and monitoring the right things and putting their energy where it really belongs, you can do so much more good in the way of keeping everything on safe ground. So the patient-centric approaches, really important. And what we want to do here is make sure that we're not providing healthcare just to patients. We're providing healthcare with patients. It's a critical paradigm shift. Utilizing analytics. Justin touched on this before. There's probably more data than most people realize they have. Even that which you don't have isn't necessarily that hard to obtain, but data really can be extremely valuable. Regulatory adherence, making sure that you're regularly looking, assessing against quality or against the regulations. Where are we? Are we practicing consistent with local and national coverage determinations with respect to the appropriate use criteria for interventional cardiology, with respect to the ACOG guidelines for OBGYN? We have to look at these periodically and ask our physicians to fulfill their responsibility themselves and for their peers to be taking a very hard look at this and looking at variation around typical practice at outliers, but also being there to help each other and educate each other through along the way to see that there's that everybody's aligned towards helping and providing the right kind of care. So let's go to, I want the last one here, just breaking down the silos. This is really important. Hospitals are organized in silos, they are, but I imagine a world, and I do see it actually in some places, where the medical staff leadership, and I'm talking about the executive leaders and the physician leaders of the medical staff, the risk management team, the quality team, the compliance team, they come together in a room and they look at the same data. I can't tell you, I mean, having been at this for a long time, how revolutionary of an idea that is, but how insightful it would be to leadership to appreciate, and for each of these people in their own disciplines to appreciate what kinds of things need to be looked at, what kinds of things could change to the benefit of all of the people involved. So we need to have more of this inter rather than intra-departmental communication. I know for some, lawyers need help, others need to help because, like medical staff, you have to be careful about what you share because you might breach the peer review privilege, but there are very effective, creative ways to get around that. So,
Hey, John, as we think about these preventative strategies, what do you see oftentimes as the key impediments healthcare organizations face of implementing those preventative strategies?
well, boy, you kind of put me on the spot but I'm going to actually, be very direct about this. So hospital CEOs, I think that's really where it starts. I'm one. It's what I was trained to do. We don't have to have a license to practice as a hospital CEO. Everybody around us has to have a license. We don't. And I think as a result of that, there's wide variability in the expertise of hospital CEOs. I believe it's hospital CEOs' responsibility to surround him or herself with the right people, to educate the board. I mean, these are people coming in from other areas, other sectors to educate. So I think the biggest problem we have in hospitals is people not arming people with the information they need to have cross discipline, cross level accountability. The board ultimately is responsible, but I, as a CEO, want to teach my board so my board can help hold me and my colleagues accountable to doing the right things. I think one of the greatest problems is the knowledge deficit. A lot of hospital CEOs don't even know what goes on down in the medical staff or don't fully appreciate what we're talking about here. So I'm just going to, there are a lot of other answers to that, but point the finger at myself and my colleagues in the at the executive level.
Hey, John, I wanted to relay a question I think you're best to answer from Beth Simpson, one of our attendees. She asked, are there specific data sets that are better than others to analyze medical necessity internally as a check to identify if true peer review medical necessity audits should occur?
That's a loaded question. By the way, before I answer that, I'm just going to say, read this last slide because this is a life career. And if I could impart anything with respect to what I've been talking about and what I believe to my core, these four elements are essential takeaways from this conversation. As far as the data goes, I would say it depends. It really depends upon what is built within the organization. Do you have a strong peer review program? I'm talking about a medical staff peer review program within your organization. Do you have effective M&Ms, or do you have physicians who are afraid to talk to each other because they're afraid to show weakness? Do you have physicians who are embracing the process rather than being afraid of it? Where there's a strong peer review program, there's less of a need for data because you have open, honest discussion around clinical care. Um, uh, is there a database? It varies widely by discipline. I would say number one and the best at the top are the American College of Cardiology and the criteria that it puts out. It's kind of black, white, and there is a gray area, but it's really helpful. ACOG. Others, contrary to popular belief, like spine surgery, there's very little that helps you understand what's appropriate and what's not. You kind of have to say, what would you line up 100 surgeons? What would they say in response to this? And you're really left to that judgment. So it depends, but I'd like to know more about the situation to better answer.
Great.
Are there other questions there? I thought I saw a few others popping up.
There's
I
one
did.
question, yeah, that was posed. I'll read it to you, John. You may be able to respond. It says, "What I struggle with as a CMO is convincing my physicians that when they push the limit on coding, that if they fall off the compliance curve, they are equally liable. They feel as if they are sheltered by the hospital since they are employed." So yeah, maybe you can just talk about that dynamic. Hospital employed providers that are, potentially pushing the line from a compliance standpoint, like where does liability fall? Meaning, is the hospital sheltering them? Are the physicians experiencing, directly liability tied to their actions?
I think there's some shelter there, but I would not count on that. I think everybody is responsible and everybody is culpable. We've got some really great coding experts within Coker, and we spend a lot of time talking about these very issues. Everybody is responsible. And what's crazy about this, and I'll just give you one example, physicians or coders actually can look at the moment of care, the episode of care, and code around that. And yet physicians know that the care that led up to that episode of care strongly relate to what that code ought to be. And so we have to work together, physicians and coders, they're supposed to get to the right type of code. But please don't depend upon coders, don't depend upon physicians for accurately reflecting what happened, especially as it relates to the prior care that led up to the episode of care. And physicians, please don't assume that coders are doing it right. Everybody is an expert at what they do, but I can tell you that you cannot get coding right if you don't do it as a team.
That's great. John, a question that always maybe I think about it. It goes back to the preventative strategies, and that is, I mean, they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I mean, have you seen organizations? Obviously, don't have to name them, but those that have implemented effective mitigating strategies that have prevented what could have otherwise been some pretty disastrous results.
Yeah, this is the best part of what I do, Justin, which is to build the programs, help. I don't build them, I advise and get to watch them be built within organizations, large healthcare systems, so that we're preventing bad things from happening. If we look at appreciating the motivations we're creating, that's one thing, but the reconnaissance is an important part. And we have seen very good practice and have been a part of it where there's variability around what should be. Let's just say super high income earners, or for whatever reason, intervention rates are way higher than others. Where you see those things, we see a threshold that, when met, results in a look into that practice. And so we'll sample, we'll look at the codes, the procedures in play, and just make sure from an outside objective perspective that the care is appropriate. And most of the time it is. Sometimes it's not. And sometimes that results in going all the way to uh, uh, the self-disclosure and repayment, given that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. So, that's on the reconnaissance side. Watching very, very closely is important. But beyond that, and what's more important, I think, is not just surprising people and ambushing physicians with "how I gotcha." How about educating before that as to what it is you're looking at, so that physicians have a chance to be aware and correct behavior and get in line with proper practice that they may have not even ever been aware of. So compliance is not just about doing it to people. Like I said, it's doing it with physicians, with the entire team. So they need to understand why we're doing this compliance thing, what we're doing, and how it's going to be uniformly applied across the enterprise.
It's great. I know we're right at time. Dan, John, I don't know if you all have any parting comments as we wrap up today and let people get back to their normal schedule.
I wish we had 3 more hours for people to listen to me talk slower and not wanna get so much out in such a short period of time. But, here's to next time, and, just wanna say thanks to the audience for being here, and you guys, thanks for helping me think through this in ways that hopefully in a short period of time, we're able to get some important points across.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would leave everybody with, I think it's been well discussed today, is to remember that at the intersection of all this is the provider and the patient, and understanding how involving both of those. John talked about patient-centric approach and involving the providers. That's a key step to actually having this have everyone engaged in the solutioning for these type of issues, as opposed to, as John had mentioned, the gotcha and the finger pointing.
Right. It's great. Well, I've learned things. It's been great to
Hey,
collaborate, and just appreciate everybody participating. Great to collaborate with Dan, you and John, and until next time.
we've got one more question that come in with a minute. Is it considered best practice to share coding audit policies with providers?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I mean, if we're going to do it with people and not to them, wouldn't it be nice to share what it is you're using, what criteria you're applying, how you're going about this important work, so that we don't find a problem and then say, you should have known. You don't know what you're taught, and so let's teach each other. Let's be there for each other. Great question. I have one last question, and that is, Dan, did your razor break or?
Remember, I'm in Wisconsin. This is deer hunting season.
Okay. All right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Great. Thanks, everyone.